afternoon, everyone. My name is Hannah Francis. I am the Marketing Manager for UK and Ireland at Wellington. And joining us today, we have Stuart Easton. So Stuart is the CEO and founder of TransparentChoice, and he has taught prioritisation at the University of Oxford. He is a speaker and blogger on the topic of portfolio management and decision making. So obviously today's webinar will be around strategic alignment and how to measure it. We will be doing a Q&A at the end of today's session. So obviously on the right hand side, you will have a Q&A section in the panel. Just ask Stuart anything and we will try and get through as many as possible. So Stuart, over to you.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks. And just again, it would be great if you jump into the chat, just introduce yourselves, where you're from, what kind of issues you're interested in, what things you're wrestling with. We've got about somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours of content to get through in an hour. So it's going to be fairly crazy. And so if you have particular topics or particular questions you're interested in, we can kind of divert and try and focus on those areas. So Hannah, thank you very much for the introduction. What I'm going to go through today is something slightly different to a lot of project management kind of webinars. We're going to come up a level and think about strategic alignment. But before we get into that, I just want to take a minute to talk about myths. Right, there are a lot of myths out there. You can jump onto YouTube, hit Google, and type in project prioritization or strategic alignment or strategic planning or any of these terms, and you'll find all kinds of people putting forward their opinions on how you should do that, right? Whether it's alignment, strategic planning, or project prioritization. And most of these so-called experts have an opinion, but the opinion is very often not really based in fact, right? They're more myth, and maybe it worked for me once, so it'll work for you, right? And and there are lots of myths out there on the web, like some we all grew up with, things like chewing gum stays in your stomach for seven years, right? It's just not true, right? It's a myth. And I'm delighted to tell you that human urine will not neutralize jellyfish stings. So next time you get stung, there is no need for you to go and find an incontinent 3-year-old to help you out. There are lots of myths out there on the internet. What we're going to do today is something a little bit different. And myth number one in strategic alignment land is that a spreadsheet is the way to go. Right? I can just build a spreadsheet to do that. That very seldom works in my experience, and we'll talk about why shortly. So everything that we're going to talk about today is actually based on research. Okay, I want to emphasize that. So this isn't about mythology. This is a little different to just typing into Google and finding the first answer. It's based on research, and it's into a research. Strategic alignment is actually all about decision making, right? It's about deciding what direction do we want to take the business and which projects are going to support that direction. Okay, that's a decision making problem. This is a decision science problem, and so we're going to take a stroll down the decision science path today, and it's not just based on a little bit of research. There's a whole bunch of research. These are all different papers that are on this branch of decision science that we're going to talk about. It's called AHP, but it's really about strategic alignment, and that's where we're heading. So one of the things that so I'm going to try and cover these topics. So when people come to our website, we often invite them to fill in a questionnaire about what is the most important thing that they're wrestling with in their portfolio management and prioritization of projects. And the number one issue that comes up, and the inspiration for this session, is strategic alignment. How do I align the projects in my portfolio with the strategy and the direction of the business? The second point that comes up is I have too many projects, or I don't have enough resources. That's the same thing. Right? So I have too many projects. The third thing that people ask about is, we're trying to find the right methodology to align our projects with the business goals. And then the fourth big challenge that people have that they tell us about is, once as they're picking a portfolio of projects, you want that to support the business goal. How do I get the executives to buy into that portfolio? And I think we're going to talk about all four of those today. And it's all connected to this theme of strategic alignment. And again, everything that we're going to cover, almost everything we're going to cover is kind of based in real solid research. And where I deviate from that, I'll try and let you know, so that you know when we're in the land of opinion. So the agenda is, this is what was on the form that you've filled in, the little flyer that went out to promote the event. So this shouldn't be a big surprise. So we're going to go through why strategic alignment matters. Is there a right way to do it? Spoiler alert, yes, there is. We're going to talk about using alignment to prioritize projects. And then we're going to talk a little bit about balancing the load, balancing how many projects and which projects we do with the resources available. And then we're going to talk a little bit about executive buy-in. So let's start with, what is strategy? Now, one of the challenges in project land is that a lot of project training spends a lot of time on methodologies and processes and tools to manage projects. And very often they don't spend enough time thinking about, why do we do projects? Well, we do projects because there's a strategy that the organization is trying to achieve. Doesn't matter if you're a government agency or a corporate or a non-profit, there are things that you're trying to achieve, right? And those things are typically caught in the set out in the mission and the vision statements. Now, I hate those documents, the mission and vision statements, because they'll often say things like, if you're a bed company, they'll say things like, we want to improve the way the world sleeps. What does that mean? How do I turn that into something I can do today, right? How does that impact my job? And the honest answer is, it's just way too high level, right? And it's not very useful. So strategy statements usually go a step further, and they'll say how, right? What are the goals? So in the case of this mythical bed company, we're going to make the most comfortable beds. We're going to be the biggest bed company, and we're going to have innovative business models. Maybe they'll maybe they're going to charge you by the snore or something instead of selling you a mattress, right? So those are the three goals that they have, right? So that is kind of the strategy piece. And then that's where programs and projects come in, because it's, how do you achieve these goals? Well, you do that through projects, right? The projects are what allows you to deliver on the strategic vision of the business. So the terminology that you tend to hear is strategy, that covers this area. And it's not a precise science, so it's a little bit, the edges are a little bit squishy, but strategy and then tactics. And for an organization to really perform, you have to be good at both strategy and tactics, right? Hannah, I'm sure you're still listening in here. So most people on the call, a lot of the people on the call, I know will know Wellington. But what you may or may not know is that an awful lot of the folks at Wellington are kind of a little bit geeky, right? They love the superheroes, they love the Star Wars, they love the Star Trek, all that kind of good stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to plot some organizations onto this and try and match them up with, what superhero, what supervillain would they be, right? So if your organization isn't good at strategy and isn't good at tactics, isn't good at executing stuff, then you're probably Deadpool, right? He does all kinds of stuff, but it's not all going anywhere, right? And he's not massively successful. If you still aren't good at strategy, but you're good at getting out and getting stuff done, you're the Hulk, right? You're ripping things apart, but nobody's quite sure why we're ripping them apart and causing all kinds of chaos. So we're not really going to achieve our goals because we're not aligning that activity with goals. We're just big and muscly and we're doing stuff, but we feel good about it. Now, the other direction you could go is you could be really good at strategy, but not very good at execution. right? Not very good at translating that strategy into projects and programs to make stuff happen. And so I think this is a bit like Lex Luthor. Now, I do very specifically mean the Gene Wilder Lex Luthor. So anyone who watched those 1970s Superman films will know what I mean. So he was this guy who was really smart, but he was not very good at executing stuff. And then Superman is the kind of organization where you're good at strategy and tactics. Okay, so we all want to be working for those companies in the top right corner. And this, and to get there, you need to both think about what is our strategy and what projects align to that strategy that we should be doing, right? So to be Superman, you have to align your projects, the tactics, with the strategy. Now, we're going to look at another version of this, but instead of thinking about, where's our company, we're now going to think about where are the projects within our portfolio, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at strategy, right? So strategy wars. We've gone from superheroes, we're going into strategy wars now, right? So there's what's the strategic impact of my projects, and how well can I execute, or how well am I executing these projects? And again, I'm hoping the Wellington folks on the call are really enjoying this the Star Wars thing, and it's only going to get worse from here. So most organizations have projects in all four of these quadrants, right? Now, we've got the Jar Jar Binks projects, right? We just want to kill them, get rid of them. Don't like Jar Jar Binks, right? He's not very good at, he's not very good at, he's not very aligned with strategy, doesn't really know where he's trying to get to, and he's not even very good at executing stuff. Right? Then we've got the Han Solo projects, right? So the Han Solo projects, again, they don't really have a plan, right? We don't know why we're doing these projects, but we are at least good at shooting stuff, right? And we get stuff done. We go in, we blow things up, we get stuff done, we cause all kinds of chaos. But crucially, we're consuming resources, and those resources are not really moving us forward strategically, right? So Han Solo, in his way, is just as dangerous as Jar Jar Binks. Then we've got the Death Star, the big strategic move. This is great. This is the big strategic project that never gets finished, right? They never finished the Death Star. It got blown up. They left a little hole there, right? So it never got finished. And so those are projects that, if they were finished, if they were completed, they would have a big impact on the business. But they're at danger because they're being starved of focus and resources and so on and so forth. And then, of course, there's the Princess Leia projects, right? She knows exactly what she's doing, and she's really good at executing stuff. So what we really want to do, once we understand this concept of strategic alignment, it lets us, oh yeah, and do you know what? I showed these slides to my kids last night. I have 13-year-old twin boys, and they said, no, it shouldn't be Princess Leia, Dad. It should be Yoda. And they thought this was a really cute photo, so I had to put it in for them today. So what are we going to do about this? This tells us something, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to call in some support, and we're going to blow those guys up, right? We should kill off Jar Jar Binks and Han Solo, take the resources from those projects and put them into the Death Star, right? And make sure that we finish that Death Star, because it'll have a really big impact. So we want to take that Death Star project and convert it into a Yoda project, right? We want to get it across here. And that's really what strategic alignment is for. That's why it matters so much to get this right, is because the projects down here are just draining resources and they're not adding a lot of value. And projects up here are being starved of resources and focus. And so they never actually deliver the value that we want to deliver. All right, so just really quickly, this is PMI data. And again, I said we're going to try and use research wherever we can. PMI data. The message from here is projects that are aligned with strategy are just far more successful than projects that aren't, right? So you can read the stuff on the left-hand side if you want, but the message is aligned projects, projects that really support your strategy, that are strategically important, are far more successful. More PMI data from Pulse of the Profession, 20% of the projects in a typical portfolio. So in your portfolio, because you're probably not doing anything that makes you better or worse than the average, right? So your portfolio has something like 20% of projects that are so badly aligned with strategy that they should be stopped tomorrow, 20% waste. Think about that. Imagine if you could identify and eliminate that waste and redirect those resources into those Death Star projects, into those really strategic projects that maybe are struggling a little bit. Imagine the impact that would have on the organization. So strategic alignment in the portfolio happens during the prioritization process. Right? It happens during the project prioritization process. So let's kind of take a few seconds and think about, do a thought experiment. What would happen if we were to improve this prioritization process a little bit from the point of view of strategic alignment? So today, what's happening is you're probably spending a little bit of time. You're probably banging a quick spreadsheet together, and we'll come back to that spreadsheet later. But you've probably got your little spreadsheet that you put together. You bang some numbers into it. There's probably not a lot of science to it, and you're ending up with 20% of your resources being wasted. Right, so that little bit of effort you're putting in is being amplified. The errors in there are being amplified to being a waste of 20% of your resources. But it's worse than that, because those projects that you should have done are not being done, which means you're missing the business value, and that business value lasts forever. Right, so if you've got a project that would save you $5 million a year, and it would run for and it would be 5-10 years, right? You're actually losing 25 or $50 million. You're not just losing the resources that you put into those projects. You're losing the benefit that good projects would have delivered. Okay, so aligning with your strategy gets amplified as well. So if you can improve that prioritization process and increase the degree to which you align your projects and your initiatives with your strategy, you get that sustained advantage, that sustained boost in value, just from a very small change up front. Okay, so that's why it's so important to focus on this. And to get that kind of boost from improving project execution rates or whatever it may be would be really, really difficult. But this prioritization process is actually quite easy to change and to improve. You just need to use the right tools to do it. And we'll talk about what they are in a few minutes. But does this really work? Right, come on, Stuart. Doesn't really work, does it? Well, actually, yes, it does. So again, this is some research. This particular one was looking at government agencies, but there's similar research looking at corporates as well that got similar numbers. So basically, strategic alignment, so the degree to which you align your projects and initiatives with your strategy explains 80% of the difference between the best performing organizations and the worst. Right, so if you're a government agency, that might be measured in terms of the gross national happiness if you're in Bhutan, for example, or it might be by some economic measure or by some voter satisfaction measure or something like that. If you're in a business, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to profitability in your share price. Right? But strategic alignment, right? And I'll say it again, strategic alignment explains 80% of the difference between the best and the worst performers. So if you want to be in the best performing organization, you really need to take care of strategic alignment. All right, so that's really why strategic alignment matters. It's not about a checklist item because the PMI says if I want to be a mature PMO, I need to do strategic alignment. It matters because it drives the success or otherwise of the overall success of your organization. So we're going to go and look at the right method. Now, we've been talking about strategic alignment as if it's easy. Right? We've been talking about it as if you just kind of pick a direction and you go in that direction. But it's not, because it's not easy. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. And the reason for that is that you have multiple stakeholders And each of those stakeholders has a different view of the world based on their journey. So for example, this guy, he's standing on the island, he sees a boat and he thinks, boat, I've been stuck here for 5 years, there's a boat, I can get off the island, right? He's very excited. This guy, he's been on that boat for 4 weeks, he's drunk nothing but recycled bodily fluids in that time and eaten raw fish, that's all he's had. And he sees land, this tiny little island, and he thinks, land, I can get off the boat. Now, these two executives have got equally valid points of view based on their journey to get to this point. But they've come to totally opposite conclusions. And that's what happens in the boardroom all the time when you're selecting projects and when you're trying to figure out, which projects really support the strategy. Because each of the people around the table has their own view of what is strategically important. So they're going to promote different projects. And that's why you get kind of politics and so forth creeping in, right? So you have bias in the decision making, you have group dynamics, politics, and it's all as a result of different people coming on different journeys to get to the point where they're selecting projects. And if you can't resolve that, then you can't come up with a common agreed definition of what strategic alignment means. And if you don't have a common agreed definition of what strategic alignment means, it means you can't measure it. You can't allocate resources to the projects that are strategically aligned because you don't know what strategic alignment really means. And so there's a lot of research that's gone into this, and typically it's in operational research departments around the world, in business schools, schools of engineering, places like that. And there are lots and lots of different methodologies that have been tested and evaluated. And a few years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, the University of New South Wales brought together a couple of decades worth of research into this really nice meta study. And they looked at over 100 different methodologies for doing this strategic alignment project prioritization thing. And what they discovered is that out of all of those, there are really only 2 methodologies that are consistently suitable. Suitable was the word they used. Suitable for prioritizing projects, especially in large organizations. They were looking mostly at large organizations in this study. Those 2 methodologies, one was called DEA, Data Development Analysis. And it kind of works, but it's really difficult to do. The other method is called AHP, the Analytic Hierarchy Process. And that works, and it's relatively straightforward, and that's why we adopted that and built that into our product, for example, for doing prioritization. So it turns out that there is a right way to do the strategic alignment thing, and it's called AHP, Analytic Hierarchy Process. So if you write nothing else down, write that down from this session. So AHP conceptually is really, really simple, right? What you do is you define your business goals, and then you convert those into criteria, and you weight the criteria. And then you collect your projects, you score the projects against these criteria, you aggregate all the data, you get some pretty pictures, and you make some decisions, right? So in concept, it's really, really simple. But what AHP does is it provides a little bit of special sauce, quite a lot of special sauce, in fact, at the top part of this process, the bit where we're converting, where we're capturing those criteria and we're weighting those criteria, because that is the bit where we're defining what does strategic alignment mean to us, right? Does it mean growing in new geographies, or does it mean acquiring new customers? Or does it mean boosting productivity, or does it mean reducing costs, right? So this is the crucial step. This is the foundation on which, because this is where you're defining what strategic alignment means. And if you don't get that step right, you can't do anything else. Right? Anything that you do will be incorrect and won't really reflect the goals of the organization. So does this AHP thing really work, right? Because we've all heard, people espousing methodologies for this, that, and the other around project management. Well, I want to come back to the fact that this is actually based on decision science research. So they've looked at lots of methodologies, and the question was, which ones work best, right? So AHP really does work. So here's an example. This is a government department in Australia. They had about 20% of the projects they were doing were kind of pet projects, right? So the guy who heads up that particular government department is called the commissioner. And the commissioner had sort of defended over 3 planning cycles, had defended projects that were consuming about 20% of their resources that everybody else thought were completely bonkers. Right? Every other executive around the table just didn't get it. But the commissioner was going, no, they're important, they're my projects, they've got to get done. Well, that was possibly the worst Australian accent on the planet. Oh dear, sorry about that one. Anyway, never mind. At the same time, they were overcommitting, right? So they were committing to doing too many projects. And whenever you do that, what you do is you just drive failure rates up. Okay, overcommitting on the number of projects you want to do is the easiest, quickest, and most reliable way to totally destroy your project delivery capabilities. Right, your project success rates will fall off. You'll start running over budget, over time, and so on and so forth. Right, so a 30% overcommit is really difficult. Now, what's really interesting in this case is that they actually had all the data. They knew they were doing that. They had a really good spreadsheet, a very mature spreadsheet. They knew what the criteria were that they cared about, right? What the dimensions of strategic alignment were. They had good data on their projects. They knew the size of the projects. They knew which resources they'd need. They had, all of that stuff was really good data, but they were still failing. And fundamentally, the reason is that nobody trusted the scores that they were getting from their magic spreadsheet. Right? So they had criteria which they weighted, and then they put in data, and then they got a score for each project. But nobody trusted those scores, and here's why. So the way that most organizations will do this is they'll pull the leadership team together around a table, and they'll write all the criteria up on a whiteboard, and they'll say, right, criteria number 1, what weight should we give to criteria number 1? And the CEO will stand up and say, well, I think that should be 23.7%. Now, there are 2 problems with that number. First problem is she just made it up. Right? There's no basis in reality to that number. It's just what felt right at the time. There's a whole bunch of books and books and books on psychology research that tells us that number is essentially meaningless. Okay, so we don't have time to go over why and how and all the rest of it, but for the sake of today, let's just agree that number is a meaningless number. Second problem with that number is that this guy disagrees with it, but he's not really thinking about what the number should be. What he's thinking is, have I had enough coffee this morning to take on the CEO in this meeting? It's only 9 in the morning. No, I think I need another couple of coffees. I'll just keep my head down. I'll keep quiet. And other people are thinking similar sorts of thoughts. So when you get to the end and you've gone through all the criteria, the same thing happens with each one. The only thing that people around the table agree on, with the possible exception of the CEO, is that the model they've just come up with for scoring projects is wrong. That's the only thing they've agreed on, but nobody actually says it, right? Because that wouldn't be politically acceptable. And so the PMO then goes off and they score all the projects and they present the scores to the leadership team, say, what project? So these are the ones with the highest score. Should we do those? And people start playing politics and trying to jam their projects in. And then the commissioner stamps his foot again and defends his pet projects, even though they didn't score that well. And it all comes down to the fact that people didn't agree with the model of strategic alignment, the definition of strategic alignment that they came up with in this meeting. Okay, so the way that AHP works is a little bit different, and it's designed, it's based on psychology research and it's based on decision science research. And basically what you do is you never ask what weight should we put on a criterion. What you do is you ask, here you put up 2 criteria and you say which one is which one's more important and by how much, right? And it's a little bit like piggy banks. You know, if you give people a bunch of piggy banks, you say, right, you get to take one piggy bank home, but we don't know what's in them, but they've only got 2 pences in them, right? That's the only thing they've got in there. And so it doesn't really matter how much. It's really hard to estimate whether there's 50 pence or £5 in each individual piggy bank. But what you can do is you can very easily figure out which piggy bank is heavier, right? And it's that similar process. So we never ask them how heavy is the piggy bank. We just ask them which piggy bank is heavier. That's the heart of AHP. And there's a bunch of fancy maths on the back end that helps keep your answers consistent, and it's checking all kinds of things. So there's a bunch of really smart stuff going on in the background. But at heart, it's a really simple process. And it looks a little bit like this. So you would define, you know, these are screenshots from our product, but you would define criteria on the left-hand side here. And criteria tend to be hierarchical by nature, right? So you've got risk, and that breaks down into various different subcomponents of risk, for example. So that adds a little bit of complexity if you're trying to do it in a spreadsheet. And then this is the weighting. So it presents the two criteria, and it asks which one's more important. But crucially, you do that as a team sport. So we can see how the people around the table are voting. And then we can identify that the guy over here on the right-hand side has a very different opinion to the others. So we can now listen to that opinion. And everyone around the table is listening to that opinion, learning from that, and maybe even changing their votes based on that opinion, right? So what that's doing is it's building understanding, knowledge, and consensus and buy-in to the model. Just this process of listening to people, we see it again and again. Just listening to each other, having my voice heard, makes all the difference in terms of how much I buy into the definition of strategic alignment. So coming back to this government department, all we did was we ingested the data they had. We took in the data they had. We didn't change any of that data about the project. We didn't change any of the criteria. The only thing we changed was we used that AHP process to build the definition of strategic alignment, right, to get people all working together. And the commissioner, when he saw the results, right, he was so bought in that he immediately killed his own projects. Right, so these projects that he defended for 3 years, he killed them off straight away. No politics, no fuss. It was just, look, I get it. I know where these scores come from. My projects suck, kill them. And they were able also to eliminate the overcommitment problem, right? So they were able to, you know, when the bucket was full, they said, right, no more projects. You know, if we manage to get through these ones, here are the next couple. And so they were able to defend and solve that too many project problem. They were able to defend the delivery resources and give them the space to actually deliver, rather than overloading them and having them running around trying to spin too many plates and actually dropping half the plates on the floor. Right, so they ended up with improved project delivery, less waste, and ultimately more business value. So there is a right way to do it, and that right way is called AHP. Now, Transparent Choice isn't the only crew that does that kind of stuff. There are a couple other companies that do this pretty well. There's one called Expert Choice and one called Decision Lens. And then, of course, Transparent Choice, we're the third. So there are the 3 companies that, in my opinion, are the ones you would look at to help support you doing this stuff. Okay, let's go on and look at how we actually use this alignment score to prioritize projects. Right, so we talked about this. Step 1, we're going to define what strategic value means. Right, so we've done that, but we haven't quite done that, because there's this question of what are my criteria? Now, we could spend another hour just on that topic, and in fact we have. If you go to our website, transparentchoice.com, click on the resources button and look for that ebooks, guides, and more. And I know some of you are doing that right now as we speak, which is great. That'll take you to the free resources section. And right here in featured resources, what you'll see is this webinar and the ebook that goes with it about how to come up with this list of criteria. So again, things I want you to take away from this session. The first one is AHP, and then this, and you know, whether you use our software or you do something else, use AHP. The second thing is, when you're on that journey to build your criteria, go watch this webinar, download this ebook, and that'll help you get a head start on it. Step 2, maturing your projects. So one of our partners likes to talk about project prioritization, not as a photograph. It's not an event that happens on a particular day. It's a movie, right, that builds up to a crescendo, right, builds up to the climax, and then there's the bit afterwards where everybody kind of calms down again. Right? And prioritizing projects is like that. You get projects coming in, you capture your projects, and they're not very well defined. You've got to take them through a process of scoring and gathering information, doing estimates and all that kind of stuff. So it's a process. It's not just a meeting, right? And that's really difficult to manage in a spreadsheet. We've talked a little bit about where spreadsheets didn't work, right? So we you know, this piece up here, you know, that's really, really difficult to do in a spreadsheet well, because it's visual. It's about people talking to each other. This piece down here, you know, managing a process and keeping all your data clean and in sync, especially if you're in a larger organization with different departments requesting projects and different delivery teams, right? Managing that complexity in a spreadsheet is pretty much impossible. So what you end up with is inconsistent data, poor data, and if you have garbage in, what do we get out? Garbage. Yeah, well done. So what you really want to do is think about how you're going to manage that in a process. Now, some PPM tools do quite a good job of this demand management piece. Ours does that, but whatever you use, I would encourage you, wherever possible, not to use a spreadsheet, because it's not that spreadsheets are bad. I love a good spreadsheet. It's just not the tool for this job. And again, ideally, what you want to be looking for is automation to help you gather the data. You know, this is a collaborative effort. If some of your strategic goals, right, those criteria, that strategic alignment piece, if some of those are about, I don't know, sales and marketing-y things, then you want sales and marketing people to be scoring projects on those particular dimensions. If some of your criteria are about engineering-y things, then you want engineers to be scoring it. So it's a process that's collaborative. You need to be able to pull together data from lots of different people to get to the end result. So again, spreadsheets aren't very good at that. I know I sound like I'm down on spreadsheets. I do love a spreadsheet, but not for this. This isn't the right place for it. So, you know, you can do this in a PPM tool. You can do it in our tool. You can we've got customers who use tools like Jira to kind of manage this sort of task thing. Lots of ways you can do it, but don't use a spreadsheet. And then, you know, one of the things that's important, again, if you remember the thing with the government department we talked about that really made the difference was trust. And so knowing where your data's come from, having an audit trail is important as well. So make sure whatever tool you put in place, you can defend that data, you know where it's come from. If you ever get challenged on it in that meeting, it says, why is this project higher than that project? You can go in and you can say, it's there because, right? Here's the data behind it. This is who gave us that data. This is who made that estimate. Now, as you're evaluating projects, you're actually going to be collecting different types of data, different types of input. Now, one of the things that lots of people get wrong about, one of the assumptions people make about strategic alignment and using it to pick projects is that it is somehow objective. And it's not. It's an entirely subjective process, right? The definition of value is subjective. How each project contributes to the definition of value is subjective, right? So it's important to be really clear about what type of data you're getting from where. So to make this a little bit more real, let's pretend we're not prioritizing projects for a second. We're going to buy a house, right? And there are basically four different classes of data we want to collect. So the first type is expert opinion, right? So I want to know, is the house in good condition? Is it going to fall down? How much am I going to spend to bring it up to the level that I want? So I'm going to get a builder in to do that. He's an expert. He can look over it. He's got his checklist. Great, we can get that data. It's subjective, but it's one person and it's expert driven. The second kind of data is more is kind of looser. So is this a good neighborhood or not? Right, so I'm going to ask my friends, is this a good neighborhood? Do you think it's a good neighborhood? Do you like the restaurants? Is it, you know, all that kind of good stuff. That's subjective, but it's a group of people who are going to give you that answer. And that really helps, right? That helps you form an opinion. But you have to be able to collect that information in a way that's meaningful. Then you have models, right? So I'm buying my house. What's the commute time from where I live, from this house I'm thinking of buying to my office, right? So we're going to get that from Google Maps. Right? It's not really subjective; that's objective data. We're going to get it from a model, and then finally, there's stuff that's just data. Right? It's not coming from a model; it's just data. So the number of bedrooms in the house is just a piece of data. And when you're prioritizing projects, you've got to be able to combine all of these different types of data into your definition of strategic alignment. And where it's subjective data, you need to be able to know, you need to know where it's come from. You need to make a deliberate decision about where should that data come from, if your answers are going to have any credibility. So it's not just simply a question of bang a spreadsheet together and put some numbers in. You have to think about the process and who needs to be involved in the process at different points. Now, I just want to talk about Bob the Builder for a second, because my kids have outgrown Bob the Builder. They loved him. In this context, I don't like Bob the Builder. I don't trust Bob the Builder, because very often expert opinions are often just as biased as anybody else's. And here's an example. This is fake data, so this isn't real data. But this looks exactly like the data that came out of a real customer situation a few weeks ago that we had. So what we have here is we have 4 different experts scoring a project on a particular variable, right? On a particular criterion. And what you often find is that experts have very different opinions, and even on stuff that seems quite almost like it's objective data, they have different opinions on what that would be, and that comes from just natural biases that they have, and so on and so forth. And so if you rely on just one person's opinion on something, you're likely to get noisy data, right? You're likely to get data that's biased one way or the other. If, on the other hand, you get just a small group of people, and it only takes a minute or two usually per project to do this, right? To look at a project and to score it, and to compare those scores and have a quick discussion that says, gee, why do you guys think it's 0? Gee, why do you think it's a, oh, right, I hadn't thought of that. And then everybody's going to converge somewhere sensible. And we had this with a global, a brand you all know. I'm not going to tell you who it is. I'm not going to tell you even which industry they're in, but it's a global brand you all know, and many of you will have owned their products, an engineering product. It's a big expensive product that we all buy from time to time, right? And they had these really great engineers estimating the complexity of a particular project, and they literally had data like this where some of the engineers thought it was really, really easy, and others thought it was really, really hard. And half the time the hard guys won, and half the time the easy guys won. So it wasn't that people always overestimate, people underestimate. It's when you bring people together, you get better data that feeds into the model, that feeds trust in the model, right? Which lets the executives make that decision. And again, this kind of collaborative knowledge sharing and knowledge building is really hard to do in Excel, right? So there are collaboration tools that will let you do that. Our tool will let you do that, but there are, you can use other ways, other online collaboration tools to help you collect this input. But I would encourage you not to rely on Bob the Builder if you can avoid it, but to get a group of builders together so that all the different biases are going to start balancing out. All right. So step 1 was, if you remember, define the model. Step 2 was let's mature it. So step 3 is let's make an informed decision now with the executive team. So now we've defined our criteria and weighted our criteria. We've scored our projects, and so now we can see the value score against cost, right? The investment. So this is value for money. So good projects live here, bad projects live there. And crucially, while we're looking at these projects, we should be tracking how much we're spending, maybe some KPIs that you're trying to hit within, big strategic goals that you've got or something, and resources that you have available. And to really get a portfolio to land with the executive team, you need them to buy into that, right? And you need to make this visible, on demand, real time. Okay, so whatever solution you come back with and use to present to the leadership team, make sure it's visual and make sure it's interactive. Right? So if it's a PowerPoint slide, that's not going to give you the interactive element, because what executives love to do, they say, well, what if we put that project in? Or what if we changed the number of resources? Or what if we did this? And they want an answer from you really quickly. So focus on value for money, first of all. Right? So not just the value score, but value for money. And then when you're presenting it, and this, by the way, this is effectively the strategic alignment score, this dimension. So this is strategic value in this case. So when you're presenting it, just make sure it's interactive so that you can spin through the questions and assumptions that the guys have. A really good example of how this worked was with a company called Suzano. So they tell us, I don't know if it's really true or not, but they tell us that they're the world's largest paper and pulp company. And that resulted from two huge companies moshing together. And their combined R&D portfolio was 130 or so projects. And when they went through this merger, the problem was that the normal problem with strategic alignment, right, which is that your executives have different understanding of what strategic alignment means, right? That was multiplied by 10 because you had two separate executive teams coming together, who each had their own vision of how they were going to conquer the world, and they were all battling to see who was going to be the survivor. Right? So not only did they have different points of view, but they were actually in competition with each other for a little while. And actually, they were very, very professional, and it wasn't a problem. I don't want to give the impression that it was chaos. It was far from that. They were incredibly professional about it, but just the nature of the situation put them in that position. So they used this AHP process to facilitate the discussion and to get everyone on the same page. And this is some of the things that they said, right? So building this AHP model brought them closer together, right? That's really important because it gets them all on the same page. And once you've got that same definition and everybody's closer together, as it were, then you can make decisions that will stick, right? So you won't get people second guessing them afterwards and trying to go around, do an end run around the portfolio. They'll buy into the portfolio and you can make it stick and really put your head down and start executing. Speed, right? So they spent a lot less time horse trading and a lot more time, but just got the decisions made and then spent the time executing. With greater confidence, everybody with the same language, trusted data, we talked about that several times today, and really clear ranking of the projects. So this is, again, just another example of how that AHP thing works. If they tried to do that with spreadsheets, and actually they did for a little while, they probably wouldn't have got there. They wouldn't have got that level of alignment that they needed to make clear decisions quickly, consistently, that would then stick and allow them to get on and execute. So they could be up in the Yoda zone or the Princess Leia zone or whatever you want to call it. So I think we're down to here at this point. Now, the next bit I'm going to go through fairly quickly, just to allow a little bit of time for some questions at the end. So balancing resources. There's a relatively easy way to do this. Once you've got your strategic alignment score, right. So we've got this thing that we saw a minute ago. So we know which projects are delivering the best value for money, and we're tracking how much resource we're consuming and how much budget we're consuming over here. So the simple way to select projects is not the way that many people do it. So what people will often do is they'll take the score, right, the strategic alignment score, and they'll rank the projects based on that score, and they'll start at the top of that list. That's not what you want to do. Strategic alignment score just tells you how much value your project's going to give, but it doesn't tell you how to maximize the total output from your project delivery team. To do that, you need to look at value for money, or value per person day, or value per something, right? Whatever your key constraint is, whether it's budget or people, you want to do value per constraint, right? Per unit of constraint, and rank your projects based on that value per constraint, right? In this case, value for money. And then what you can just do is you can say, great, we're going to start at the top of the list, and we're going to work down the list until we run out of money or run out of resources, or whatever that key constraint is. So that's going to get you a pretty good answer. But there's a challenge with this, which is that, especially with larger organizations, you often have multiple resource pools, you have multiple resource constraints. So you have different delivery teams, for example. If you're a government agency, you probably even have different budgets that you can pull from, right? Which is really complicated stuff. Right? And when you get to that level, this will still give you a good starting point, but it doesn't really give you an optimized portfolio in any sense, because you might optimize your portfolio. You might drive your portfolio based on your total budget and only use half of one of your buckets of resources, right? So to really figure out how you're going to manage, how you're going to optimize that, you have a couple of options. You can either sit down with a spreadsheet, right? Not spreadsheets. You can either sit down with a spreadsheet and just start guessing, right? Putting projects together to see how you can get the maximum value by combining different projects, how you can get maximum value and stay within all your different multiple constraints. Or you can try something like, there's a technique called linear programming, which is basically it's a mathematical technique where you say, right, we're going to maximize this goal, go, and it tries to solve an equation. And the problem is that often doesn't work if you have dependencies and things like that. So we have dependencies between projects, folks. So linear programming tends to break, and there were a lot of people a decade or so ago who put a lot of effort into researching how to do that well. And the general consensus is even the people who were promoting that method have kind of backed off because it just wasn't consistently acceptable. So the current best practice is to grab Robbie the robot, a little bit of artificial intelligence, and to allow that to simulate thousands of projects. So you start with a bunch of projects, you pick the best ones, you plot them on the chart over here. Then we're going to create a whole bunch of variants on those portfolios, and we're going to pick the best ones, and then we're going to do that again. We're going to pick some more variants. We're going to pick the best ones, and we keep repeating that until over here on the left-hand side, we see a flat line. That tells us that we've got a portfolio that really is the best. And so if you do that a few thousand times, you're going to end up with a portfolio that works. So combining a little bit of AI to guide the simulation with some simulation tools will help you optimize that. Now that's a lot of work. Again, there are a few vendors and a few tools out there that will help you do that. Ours is one of them, but there are a few out there that will help you do this. But if you're running a large portfolio, this is definitely something that you want to do. This is how you maximize that value, strategic value, in an environment where you have multiple resource constraints. And there's absolutely no way you can do that in a spreadsheet. It looks a little bit like that. Fantastic. So we've kind of got to there. And this last one now becomes really easy. Because we used AHP, because we've now got good data coming from a trusted source, and we're helping the executives balance, more easily optimize the portfolio and find the right balance between value and resource utilization, we have exec buy-in. You don't have to do anything else. If you follow the right process to get there, then you have exec buy-in. And so on that note, I just want to say thank you. If there's more, if you want to learn more, we actually have a load of stuff around strategic alignment and project prioritization on our website. Easiest way to find it is bang project prioritization to Google. you'll see this, and just click on that link, Project Prioritization, the Ultimate Guide, and there'll be just loads and loads of resources there for you. Great, so any questions, Hannah?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, thank you so much, Stuart. That was a really, really good webinar. A lot of information to take in, and I'm sure that everyone found it really beneficial to attend. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and for taking time out of your day to do that. We do have a question from David from Proactive by Design, and he is interested in strategic alignment when combining innovation and change. So it's not really a question, I don't think, but yep. I think just to talk around that topic.
Great. So just really, really quickly, because again, that's probably a whole 1 hour webinar on its own, David. So thank you for the questions. Good one. So one of the things that we didn't really spend a lot of time, that we didn't spend time on in this session, didn't have time to spend, is that you actually have to make a decision about what is a portfolio, what makes up your portfolio. So often you know what people think of as one portfolio, which is everything the engineers deliver, right, is actually several different portfolios. You might have the run the business portfolio. That's all about business efficiency. You might have a portfolio of projects that are about growing the business, and an innovation portfolio about transforming the business. And so you would basically have a different scoring model for each one of those. And then there are other techniques you can use to sort of balance how much resource goes into each one of those pots. But the simple answer is that you know it's a good idea to group projects together into groups that have a similar strategic goal. So run the business is all about efficiency, grow the business is about growth and change, and then transform the business is those big innovation portfolios.
Great, thank you so much, Stuart. We've got another question from Mike, and that's how does this align with or differ to MOP, please?
To what, sorry?
It says MOP.
MOP, okay.
I'm not, no, I thought, okay. Do you mean Microsoft Project maybe? I'm not too sure. He just says MOP. Mike, is it Microsoft Project you're referring to? I don't know if you could just ask tell me in the chat, or sorry, management of portfolios. There we go.
Okay, so it's yes, sorry, yes, right. No, I'm with you. Yeah, so it's actually quite consistent with management of portfolios. I think it's really just a more structured methodology. You know, I think MOP has some how should I put it? The concept of MOP is fine because it's using this comparing projects directly type idea and pairwise comparison. But when you're doing that for a portfolio that's got more than 8 or 9 projects, that becomes unwieldy very, very quickly. And so AHP has really, it's not massively dissimilar in concept, but AHP has just stood the test of time. And has been honed and refined so that you can get over those problems of, you know, pairwise comparison of lots of projects turns into an awful lot of questions, right? Very, very quickly. So it helps overcome some of those hurdles, and frankly, the maths behind it is a lot more rigorous. So and the methodologies that are wrapped around AHP will help avoid some of the common biases that tend to creep in with MOP and Moscow and other methods for doing this. So it's a good question. The answer is very simply that you know, if you think back to the slide where we talked about the 200 different the 100 different methodologies, you know, all of those methodologies had limitations, including AHP. But just AHP and DEA were the two that actually just consistently worked.
Great, thank you, Stuart. And just another one, will you be showing the slides from the session? Or is it just, we obviously
yes,
have a
I'll certainly share them with you, Hannah, so you can feel free to share them with everybody else.
That's really great. So what I will do to everyone that's attended is I will send you out an email with the recording, with the slides, also with a link to Stuart's website and a link to contact him if you have any further questions. But yeah, feel free to get in touch with either of us with anything that you've seen in today's webinar. Probably Stuart more than me, but yes. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone. And a huge thank you to you, Stuart, for taking the time out. That was a really, really good webinar, and I'm sure that everyone's really appreciated it.
And thank you, everybody, for attending. Hannah, thanks for being such a gracious host. And,
no problem.
And do reach out with any questions. You know, we'll more than happy to help.
That's great. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'll let you get back to your afternoon, and yes, have a great day.